my students create a Google presentation, what I like to do is I like to let each student actually open up and create their own presentation, which is just made up of one slide, and then when they're done their slide, I ask them to share it with me, and then that way I get to collect everybody's work and I can comment on each individual student's work so that other students can't see what my comments are for their friends, and that way I keep it kind of private in terms of my feedback to particular students. And then what I do is I take the presentation slides they've created and shared with me, and I'll copy them into a main presentation, which then I share back with them as a view only or a comment only presentation. So here's an example. When we were working on making inferences, I made this first page, and then as students shared their work with me, I would copy their work and then paste it into my presentation so that they could then, we'd have everybody's work all in one place. And I can show you quickly how to do that. So what I asked them to do was to create their own presentation, and once they do that, so if I click on that, it'll open up a new presentation, and the first thing I give them criteria on some of the things that they must do right away. So the first thing I ask them to do is I ask them to title their presentation, and so usually I'll give them a generic title. So for that last assignment that I showed you, it was called the Frosty Inference Work. So they would call it the name of what they were doing. So if they're working on, so they would call it Frosty Inference, and then I would ask them to put their name or their initials at the end. They say okay, and then right away I get them to come up here to the top right hand side and share their work with me. So right away I want them to put my name in. Because they've done this so many times, they just type in my first letter and it pops up, and then I ask them to give me editing rights, and then they send it to me, and I'll show you then what it looks like. So after they do that, then I have like all their work will come into the shared with me folder, and then what I do is I create a new folder in my drive, and I drag the work that they've shared with me into the folder. So here you can see on the left I have a literacy folder, and then in that I have a folder called student presentation slide inference, and over here on the right you'll see all the work of my students. So all their presentation slide, just one slide each, has all been shared with me, and then what I do is I'll create, so here you can see all their work. I'll create a new presentation. At the top you'll see the tab. Here's my new untitled presentation, and here's the tab of all work, student work. And what I do is once this opens, I'll come back here to the whole class group. I select the slide that I want on the left and I copy it. Then I come back up and I open up the tab of my new presentation, and then on the left I'll simply click in that box, the number 1 box, and I'll paste Control V the work into that box, and there it is, it appears. And I just keep doing that. I go back and forth between the area where I've kept all my student work, and then I bring it back into this one presentation. So at the end of this presentation, when I want to share it, well, I have to give it a title, so I'll call it Mr. C's class inference work. I'll save it, and then what I do is I don't invite people with their email address. I'll come up here where it says private, and I'll change that, and I'll say anyone with the link, and then I'll come down to the bottom and I'll change it to can comment, and I'll save that, and then that way when I send home the link, and I've got a way of shortening that link so it's not so long, but I send home the link, and then I can share student work with parents, and parents can comment if they wish, and the students can comment if they wish. And then that way I have control over the presentation that we've put together, and it avoids all kinds of problems that I've seen when everybody's working the same presentation. I've seen people lose other people's work. I've seen people reading other people's comments on their slides, so it gets kind of tricky. I didn't like the way it was working, so I stopped doing that. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, but I thought I'd give you a visual to go with some of the things I was talking about.